Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shiur.
Shalom and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Brachos Daf Chavav, who right on top of the Amud says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Shimon Levi, Sefer Torah. If there is a Sefer Torah present in the bedroom in a place of Tashra Shamita, in that case, it is not enough. It is not sufficient to have kiss b'seich kiss or kli b'seich kli, a double wrapping, double encasing. Apparently, the kedusha, the sanctity of the Sefer Torah, shines through. It spreads beyond its coverings. It extends into the whole area. Therefore, one is required to make tzorech lasis mechitza asar tefachim. It is necessary to create a partition to actually separate the Sefer Torah, a partition of 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim wide, to create its own area, its own domain, and then it is permitted. Continues the Gemara with a story. Mazutra ikla lebei Rav Ashi. Mazutra visited the home of Rav Ashi. Chazi leduchte. He noticed the place, the room, the bedroom of Mar bar Rav Ashi, the son of Rav Ashi. The manach bei Sefer Torah. There was a Sefer Torah present there. V'avad le mechitza asara. And he erected a partition, asara tefachim, for it. Amar lei, so Mazutra challenged him and he said, Keman ke Rabbi Shimon Levi? Are you following in accordance with the shita, with the view of Rabbi Shimon Levi? That's why you arranged the bedroom in this manner? Eimod Rabbi Shimon Levi, the lesle beis achrina. You know, when Rabbi Shua taught us this halacha, this leniency of creating a mechitza for Sefer Torah, that is only when one doesn't have a choice. He has no alternative. He has no beis achrina. In this case, bais means a room. He has no other room to place the Sefer Torah there. However, in your case, Mar ha'isle beis achrina, you have another room. So you may not rely on this halacha. Amar Leisi responds to him, you're right, lava datoi, I didn't think about it. So in conclusion, for tefillin, it is enough to have a double encasing. For Sefer Torah, one is required to make a mechitza. That is only when he has no alternative. Lichatchila, preferably one should place the Sefer Torah in an entirely different room. Continues the Gemara. How much should a person distance himself from Meraglayim, from Tzoya? An amount of 4 amas, says the Gemara. Amar Rava, Amar Rav Zchor, Amar Rav Huna. Lo yishanu. This halacha of 4 amas is only said elo la'achirav, when the Tzoya is found behind the person. Aval lefanav, but if it's in front of him, we require much more. Marchik malay einav. He needs to distance himself malay einav, as far as the eye can see. V'chein l'tefila. The same thing applies to davening as well. He needs to distance himself from the tzoya malay enough, as far as the eye can see. What is the reason for this? Explains the Rashba, because the pasuk said "V'lo yirah b'cha ervas davar." You should not be seen by you in ervas davar, and this is referring to these types of item as well. Meraglayim, tzoya, it cannot even be within eyesight. When a person sees something, he connects to it. Therefore, one must make sure that is beyond his eyesight. The poskim speak out, even at night, or even a blind person has the same halacha. We measure by the distance that an average person by day would be able to see. So this is the source according to the Rashba. The Rosh holds that the source is from the pasuk of Ahayim Achanecha Kadosh. Your camp should be holy. Therefore, even if it's beyond 4 tefachim, it is still considered to be a machne that is not Kadosh. Therefore, one must distance himself Meloy einav, from the tzoya, from the reaglayim. Now, what is the practical nafkamina, the practical difference between these two approaches? What will be in a case where the tzoya and reaglayim are behind the mechitza, in a different room? According to the Rosh, it is already beyond your machna. It is not in your camp. Therefore, even if you could see it, there's no problem. Your camp, your room is kadosh. Therefore, it would be permitted. According to the Rashba, as long as it's still within Malay Einav, you can still see it, even if it's in a different room. It is still considered to be you can still see it, and therefore it's prohibited. Continues the Gemara. Aini, is that so? That if Tzoya Meraglayim are within eyesight, it is Asr. Va'amar Rafram, Ba'papa Amar Rav Chizda, Oimid Adam connected Beis HaKisei Mispal. A person could stand, one could stand opposite of Beis HaKisei, as long as he's marchik, he distances himself 4 amas, and he could daven there. We're not concerned with Malay Einav, if you could still see the Beis HaKisei. Says the Gemara, Ch'mayaskinan, we're speaking about the Beis HaKisei Shein Beit Tzoya. Beis HaKisei is free of any Tzoya, and therefore in this case it's not a problem. Says the Gemara, Eini, is that so? you're differentiating between a Beis HaKisei that contains Tzoya at the present moment, or it was cleaned out of its Tzoya. Va'amar Rav Yosef bar Chanina, Beis HaKisei shamru, the legal status of a Beis HaKisei, this Beis HaKisei that the Chachamim refer to regarding the prohibitions of Torah, of Tefillah, of Krishma, is Afa B'Shem Beit Tzoya, even if it's cleaned out of Tzoya. Nevertheless, the makim, the place, the domain, this Beis HaKisei is still has a legal status of a Beis HaKisei. One must be marchik from it, regardless of if it contains Tzoya or not. And the same halacha regarding a Beis HaMerchotz, we know that one is not allowed to speak words of Torah inside a Beis HaMerchotz. Beis HaMerchotz shamru Afa B'Shem Beit Adam. Even if the Beis HaMerchotz doesn't have any person undressed inside it at the present moment. Ella, rather, apparently we're speaking about a new Beis HaKisei. We can't say that Beis HaKisei was free of Tzoya, it wouldn't make a difference. But rather we're speaking of Beis HaKisei that was Bechadi, it was never used, it was simply designated, it was set aside to be used as a Beis HaKisei, and therefore it's not a problem. Says the Gemara, that's not so simple either. Ravina actually had a question regarding a Beis HaKisei that was designated but was not used for a Beis HaKisei. His minoi the Beis HaKisei mao. If one designates an area to be used as a Beis HaKisei, what is the legal status? What is the halacha? Yesh zimun or yein zimun? Does the designation make it into a din of Beis HaKisei? Is it chal? Does it retain the status of Beis HaKisei? Yesh zimun, does the designation have significance? Or yein zimun, or perhaps the designation does not have any significance. So we see that Ravina raised this possibility. He raised this sad, this svara, that even designation can make it into a din Beis HaKisei. So apparently it's not so simple to say that a Beis HaKisei that was chadati wouldn't pose a problem. Says the Gemara, no, there's a difference. Ravina's question was only raised regarding l'meikim alei litzlui b'gavei, to go inside into the interior of the Beis HaKisei, inside the Beis HaKisei that was designated as Beis HaKisei, being that you're standing in the place, on the place that will be used for Beis HaKisei, it was already designated for Beis HaKisei, there's a reason to think that perhaps there's a prohibition. This is the actual place of the Beis HaKisei. So even if it's new, it wasn't actually used, it was merely designated, perhaps Ravina raises the possibility that perhaps it is prohibited. Aval, however, kinegdoi, if he's standing outside that area and he's merely facing it, loy, certainly in that case, merely designating a place as a Beis HaKisei, that wouldn't prohibit one from standing outside of it and davening. The fact is, it's not a Beis HaKisei yet, it wasn't used yet. Therefore, facing it, merely standing kinegdoi, wouldn't pose a problem. Continues the Gemara. Omar Rava, Hani bate kisei de Parsoi, these latrines, these Beis HaKisei of Parsoim, of Persians, Afagav de Isput Tzoya, even though they contain Tzoya, Kestum and Dami, they're as if they're closed up. And they don't pose a problem, they don't have the status of a Beis HaKisei. Their Beis HaKisei was built in the following manner. They had a deep tunnel, a burrow, which was dug into the ground diagonally, where the Tzoya would simply drop in and roll into the depth of the burrow 4 amos away, so there was no Tzoya actually in place. It wouldn't remain at the opening of this burrow. Therefore, says Rava, doesn't have a status of a Beis HaKisei. Since the Tzoya is always 4 amos away, so it's considered Kestum and Dami, it's considered as if it's closed off, meaning there's no presence of Tzoya in this Beis HaKisei, and it doesn't have the status of a Beis HaKisei. So in conclusion, what is the halacha regarding reciting Krishma keneged Beis HaKisei? So firstly, regarding Tzoya that's mi'achrav, that's behind the person, 4 amos is enough. However, if it's milfanov, if it's in front of him, we require Malay Einav. A Beis HaKisei that contains Tzoya certainly has this halacha. A Beis HaKisei that does not contain Tzoya, it was cleaned out of its Tzoya, it still retains its legal status, its halacha as a Beis HaKisei. Regarding a Beis HaKisei chadati, it was merely designated to be used as a Beis HaKisei. So that depends. Inside the Beis HaKisei, there's a shaila, there's a question. Ravina raises a possibility that even then, even in Beis HaKisei chadati, it would be aser. However, this is only a restriction perhaps inside. But outside the Beis HaKisei, connected the Beis HaKisei, facing this Beis HaKisei, would be mutter, it would not have the same status as an ordinary Beis HaKisei. And finally, regarding a Beis HaKisei, the Parsoya, the Persians, that is not considered to be a Beis HaKisei at all. Regarding today's modern day Beis HaKisei, there's a discussion in the Poskim, the Chazon Ish has a shaila about it, and there's no absolute conclusion. Generally, the custom today is to be machmir, to be stringent, and to relate to it as a full-fledged Beis HaKisei when we can do so, when one is able to be machmir. However, there's a svara to say that it's not a Beis HaKisei since the waste gets washed away. However, the svara to say, the reason to say that it is a Beis HaKisei, because it is a bit different than those Persian Batei Kisois, since in today's Beis HaKisei, the tzoya does remain there somewhat until it's washed away, which is a bit different than the Persian Batei Kisois, where the tzoya would simply roll down immediately into this deep burrow and would disappear out of sight. At least it would be at a distance of 4 amas, which is a different domain. Continues the Mishnah. Zav Shira Keri, a Zav who was Tameh with Tumas Ziva, and then he got an additional Tumah of Tumas Keri, or V'nida Shepolta Shechvazera, a Nida who was Tameh Tumas Nida, and then she expelled Zera and she became Tameh with Tumas Keri. V'ameshamesha Shirasa Nida, an Isha that detachment, she became Tameh Tumas Keri, and then she became a Nida. Tzrichan Tefillah, they require Tefillah to allow them to speak words of Torah, to daven. Now, although their Tefillah, their immersion will not purify them completely, they'll still have their more stringent Tumah. For instance, a Zav, even if he's Toivel, his Tefillah, his immersion won't purify him from his Ziva. Nevertheless, the Tanakama requires a Tefillah in order to allow him to speak Divrei Torah and Divrei Tefillah, although he'll still remain Tameh on account of his additional Tumah. For Rav Yehuda Poita, Rav Yehuda doesn't require, we'll see in the Gemara, the reason. Says the Gemara, Iboilu, the Gemara asks the question as follows. Bal Keri Shira Ziva Rav Yehuda, Mau. Suppose a Bal Keri, who is Tameh Tumas Keri, then he got an additional Tumah of Tumas Ziva. What will be the halacha according to Rav Yehuda? Mi Pater Rav Yehuda Hasam. Should we say that Rav Yehuda exempts, in the case of the Mishnah, of Zav Shira B'Keri? First he became a Zav and then he became a Balkeri. Why does he exempt in that case? The Meikar Lavrat Filahu. Since the first Tumah that he got, the Ziva, doesn't subject him to Tefillah, meaning the Takanas Ezra, to prohibit a Balkeri from words of Torah, from words of Tefillah, was directed specifically at a Balkeri. But any other Tumah doesn't carry that halacha. As explained in the Gemara earlier, since Keri is associated somewhat with lightheadedness, with Kalas Roish, therefore there's a restriction on Balkeri to speak words of Torah, words of Tefillah. However, a Zav, as stringent, as Chamar as a Tumah is, nevertheless it doesn't require one to be Toivel to speak words of Torah and words of Tefillah. So in this case, since the initial Tumah of Ziva did not carry this requirement, says Rav Yehuda, even when he gets another Tumah of a Tumas Keri, since on account of his first Tumah he wasn't required to be Toivel, therefore even when he gets an additional Tumah, it doesn't change things. Since the first Tumah, which was more stringent, didn't require, certainly the second Tumah, which is merely a Tumah Balkeri, won't require him to be Toivel. But however, in the reverse case, Aval Balkeri Shira Ziva, if initially he became Balkeri, which subjects him to Takanas Ezra, he requires Tefillah in order to speak words of Torah. The Mikor Bar Tefillah, the first Tumah that comes, requires him to be Toivel. Therefore, even if he gets an additional Tumah of Tumah Ziva, Mechayev, Rav Yehuda will require him to be Toivel. Perhaps, Loishna makes no difference. Why doesn't it make a difference? Because the point of Rav Yehuda is that any individual that carries with him a Tumah Chamura that does not become alleviated through merely being Toivel, so there's no point in requiring him to be Toivel, since he'll still remain Tameh. So that is the reason for Rav Yehuda's Shita that exempts all these individuals that have a combination of two Tumahs. He exempts them from Tefillah. It has nothing to do with the order, the sequence of how they received the Tumahs. So we have two tztadim, we have two sides in the Gemara. How do we approach, what is the svar of Rav Yehuda? Is it because of the sequence, or is it simply because he holds that the immersion won't be matire them, so there's no reason to obligate them? Tashma, ha-meshameshes rasa nida tzricha tefillah. We have the last case in the Mishnah where she was a Meshameshes, she became Tumah Tumas Keri, and then she became a Nida. The Tanakama requires Tefillah, Rav Yehuda exempts. Says the Gemara, Mishameshes Ras Anida. This case is identical to Balkari Shiraziva Adamya. It is similar to a Balkari that became a Zav, meaning first she became a Balkari on account of her Tashmish, and then she becomes a Nida. So first, the first Tumah subjected her to Tevilas Ezra, to the requirement of Takanas Ezra. Nevertheless, V'karpat Rabbi Yehuda exempts. Shema Mina. Apparently, the Rabbi Yehuda svar is that in any case where a person contains a Tumah Chamura which does not become alleviated through being Toivel, Rabbi Yehuda exempts him from Tefillah, and he may speak words of Torah and Tefillah. There's no point in requiring to be Toivel, since this immersion won't be Matayr. Says the Gemara, Tana Reb Chia Behedya, he had a brisa that explicitly says this, Balkari, Shura Aziva. First he was a Balkari and then he became a Zav, Tzarech Tefillah, he requires Tefillah. However, Rav Yehuda, Paiter, Rav Yehuda exempts him, and apparently it has nothing to do with the sequence, nothing to do with the order of events. Anytime a person that has a Tumas Keri with another Tumah Chamura, he exempts him from being Toivel to speak words of Torah and words of Tefillah. Hadran Lach Mishamesi. Continues the Mishnah. Tefillah Shachar Ad Chatzos. The morning davening, Tefillah Shachar, the time to daven, Tefillah Shachar extends until midday at Chatzos. Read Oima Adal choice, up until 4 hours. Now, what is the makar, what is the source for the mitzvah, the obligation to daven? According to the Rabban, it is a Derabanan, it's a rabbinic obligation. According to the Rambam, it is a mitzvah chiyuv min ha-Torah, because it says, "Va'avadtem es Hashem Elokeichem," and the Chacham darshan, "Eizi avodah shebelev." What is the service of the heart? Havayim yizot tefillah. This is prayer. Tefillah involves emotional exertion. It's a avodah. It's a service that involves the emotions, the heart. So this is the makar, the source min ha-Torah, for the obligation, for the mitzvah to daven. However, the content, the timing, that was instituted by the Rabbanan. Min ha-Torah, any tefillah, a person davens once a day, which a tefillah that contains the following 3 elements: shvach, praise, then comes requesting tzrachim, bakashat tzrachim, and finally concluded with haidaya, acknowledging, thanking Hashem. Any tefillah that contains these 3 elements is considered a tefillah min ha-Torah. As many times a day as a person decides to daven, and with any wording that he chooses, that is the basis, that is the basic chiyuv min ha-Torah. The Rabbanan, the Chachamim, Ezra and his Bezdin, the Anshe Knesset Agdolah, the Great Assembly, they composed the nusach, the text of the tefillah. The Chachamim established the zmanei ha-tefillah, as you will see in our Mishnah. The tefillah ha-shachar extends up until Chatzos. Rabbi Yehuda says up until 4 hours. The Gemara explain the background for these various times. They correspond to the time of the Akrovas Karbanos in the Beis Hamikdash. Therefore, the morning tefillah extends up until the time when they will makriv the Tamid Shachar, and so on, as we will see in the Gemara. So again, says the Mishnah, Tefillah Shachar, the morning tefillah at Chatzos extends until midday. Rabbi Yehuda at Adal Shois until 4 hours. Tefillah Mincha, the afternoon tefillah at Ha'era until evening. Rabbi Yehuda at Plaga Mincha until half of the Mincha. The Gemara will explain exactly the meaning of this. Tefillah Erev, the evening davening, Ein Lakva, has no fixed time. You can daven the whole night. V'shal Musafim, the Tefillah Musaf Kol Yom, the entire day. Rabbi Yehuda at Zayin Shois until 7 hours. Says the Gemara, is that so? That Tefillah HaShachar extends until Chatzos V'Amini? We have a brisa that seems to indicate otherwise. Mitzvasa, the mitzvah of reciting Krishma is iman Neitzachama, is with Neitzachama. Kadesh Yismech Gula Tefillah, meaning one is meant to conclude his Krishma at Neitzachama at the beginning of sunrise, so that he can be Samech, he can join the Gula, the Bracha following Krishma with Tefillah without interruption, since the Tefillah will begin right then at Neitzachama. By doing so, he will be davening by day, meaning since he delays his Krishma up until that point, that allows him to daven at the beginning of the day and not before the beginning of the day. So apparently the time to daven is right at Neitzachama. Says the Gemara, Kitanya Hilu Vasikin. That Bryce is speaking about those Vasikin, those special people, those devout people. It is not meant as obligatory as a chiyuv for the general public. The Vasikin, those devout people, those people that cherish the mitzvahs, that sought to fulfill the mitzvahs in the most precise way, and daven at the earliest possible opportunity of a Netzach Chama, which was the beginning of this Mount Tefillah. So they would conduct themselves in this manner. They would finish their Krishma right by Netzach Chama and start right then with Shachris. However, the general public certainly davens much later and up until Chatzos. Says the Gemara, is the deadline for the general public only up until Chatzos and no more? For Amar Rav Mari, Rav Mari, the son of Rav Huna, said, he was Rav Huna, of Yirmiyah Abba, the son of Yirmiyah Abba. Amar Rav Yechon, name Rav Yechon. Tov le'ispal arvis, one who erred and missed Tfilas arvis, mispal b'shachar shtayim. He may make up for it by davening twice, Tushman Esreis, in the morning. Shachris, if he misses Shachris, mispal b'mincha shtayim, then he davens twice by mincha, one for the current obligation, one to compensate for Shachris. So apparently, Tfilas Shachris extends past Chatzos. We see that he can daven a Tfilah on account of Tfilah Shachris, even though it's already afternoon. Says the Gemara, you're right, Kuli Yoima, the entire day Matzah V'Azil, a person could daven. However, Ad Chatzos, Yavel Eschar Tfilah B'Zmana. Up until Chatzos, we're given the increased reward, the greater reward for davening Tfilah in its right time. Past Chatzos, Schar Tfilah Yavel, you're right, we give him a reward for his davening, we give him Schar. But Schar Tfilah B'Zmana Lo Yavel, we don't give him the greater reward fitting for someone who davens at the right time. Continues the Gemara discussing this halacha of compensating, of being mashlim. If one misses a tefillah, how is he meant to conduct himself? One person errs and he forgets to daven v'yispal mincha. He didn't get a chance to daven mincha. Maush yispal arvis beis. What is the halacha regarding davening twice by Ma'ariv? Now, when we speak about ta, by the way, we're speaking about one who didn't do it intentionally. It was a ta, it was an error, whether it was a shaygig or whether he just couldn't daven for various reasons, as discussed in the halacha. But I'm now speaking about one who intentionally misses his tefillah. So in any case, the Gemara asks Shaila, what about if one misses mincha? Can he make it up with Ma'ariv? If you'll go and you'll tell me, let's bring a proof from the halacha of tov le'ispal arvis mispal shachris beis. We just mentioned that if one misses arvis, he can make it up with shachris. He davens twice shachris. But that is different, says the Gemara. That's not a raya. You can't prove from there to our question. Over there, mishum dechad yoimahu, it's one day. The evening is the beginning of the day. Therefore, if he misses arvis, he can make it up tomorrow morning by shachar, since it is halacha he considered to be as one unit one day. But in our case, where he missed mincha, perhaps avalacha tefillah b'makam karbani, since tefillah is bimkam carbon, it corresponds to the karbanos. It is instead of bringing a carbon, once the day passes, it cancels the carbon. You can't make up a missed carbon. It's already the next day. As Rashi explains, if one misses a carbon musaf in the base of Mikdash, you can't bring a double musaf on the next day. Therefore, perhaps since he missed mincha, now it's already night, it's already the next day, you can't make it up with Ma'ariv. Or perhaps, no, given that Tzloisa Rachmi, since davening Tzloisa is Rachmi, it's a request for mercy, so the Chacham were more lenient in this regard, and it's different than Karbanos. Chacham will allow him to daven even if it's the next day. Kol Emas, whenever he wants, the boy, whenever he wants, Masi Bazli can daven. So we have two sides of a question here. Perhaps should we say that it is so dependent on the halach of Karbanos, once we miss the day, it's over, or can we say the Chacham were lenient since it is a request for mercy, we allow him to do so even if it's the next day. Tashma, come on here. If he skipped mincha, mispal aris beis, he can make it up by davening twice aris. We do not apply this phrase, this concept of you missed the day, you missed the carbon. In this case of tefillah, he may compensate even on the following day. We have a question, a brisa, which seems to indicate otherwise. One who is twisted, you can't straighten it out anymore. One who is missing, you can't count it anymore. Says the Gemara, something twisted can be straightened out. That's referring to one who missed suspended Krishma of the evening, or Krishna shel Shachris. Oi, Tefillah shel Arvis, an evening Tefillah, or he missed a Tefillah shel Shachris. That is a twisted one who can't straighten himself out anymore. He missed the opportunity. One who is missing, can't count anymore, can't be counted anymore. This is referring to a person whose friends gathered together, they counted themselves for a Dvar Mitzvah, they were going to do a mitzvah, and he did not join them, so he missed an opportunity, can't make it up anymore. Apparently, we see that if one missed a tefillah, you can't make it up. So how can you say that if one misses a tefillah, he merely davens twice the next tefillah? The Brachos says if one misses a tefillah, it's an opportunity, it's a missed opportunity, it can't be made up. No, on this halacha of Muvas Leichel Liskain is referring to a case Shabital b'mezid. He willfully suspended, he missed his tefillah intentionally. In that case, he can't make it up anymore. However, in the case where he did it unintentionally b'shaygeg, then we give him the opportunity to make it up in the following tefillah. Amar Rashi Dei Kanami, I'll prove it to you from the words. The Tani Bitel, he cancelled, he willfully missed the tefillah. Like Tani Ta, doesn't say that he erred, that he unintentionally did it. Shmamina, it's obvious that this quotation, this reference to one who was twisted, can't straighten himself out anymore. This is merely speaking about a person who did it b'mezid. He willfully missed his opportunity, therefore he can't make it up anymore. So in conclusion, there's a halacha of being mashlim. If one misses a tefillah b'shogeg, he can compensate, he can make up by davening twice Shemona Esrei in the following tefillah. Tosfos points out that aside from the restriction of b'shogeg, meaning that it only applies to somebody who missed b'shogeg, Tosfos says it only applies to the tefillah smucha, to the tefillah immediately following. But if it's already two tefillahs ahead, he can't be mashlam anymore. Tosfos also points out that this halacha of hashlama only applies to tefillahs other than musaf. Regarding tefillahs musaf, since it was directly established for the carbon of musaf, so the reasoning, the rationale of the Gemara of rachmi, that tefillah is rachmi is a request for mercy, that doesn't apply to tefillas musaf, which was directly related to the karba musaf. Therefore, one who misses karba musaf, he can't be mashlim by davening twice during the next tefillah. There's one more halacha regarding hashlama, which will be discussed, elaborated on in the coming Gemara, that the order of the tefillahs, one davens twice, right? One is for the obligation, one is to make up. The first one needs to be for the current obligation, for the current chiv. The second one is meant to be for the hashlama, and not in the reverse. We'll see this in the upcoming Gemara. Continues the Gemara. Tanu Rabbanon. Ta'av v'lo yispalel mincha. Be'erev Shabbos, one who erred and he missed mincha on Erev Shabbos. Come Shabbos, what is he meant to do now? It says the Brachos mispalel b'l Shabbos time. He davens two Shemona Esreis, Friday night. The first one will account for the current obligation, and the second one for the compensation. It will be a makeup for the tefillah that he missed. Although the tefillah that he missed was a weekday tefillah, nevertheless, we follow the current text, and it will be considered to be a compensation, a hashlama, for the weekday mincha that he missed. Continues the Brachos. Tav le'ispal mincha b'Shabbos. If he missed mincha on Shabbos afternoon, similar halacha. Mispalel b'motzei Shabbos shtaim shel chol. Come motzei Shabbos, he davens twice, two weekday Shemona Esreis. The first one will be regarded as the current Shemona Esrei, for the current Chiv, the current Ma'ariv, and the second one will count for a Hashlama, for the Mincha that he missed. Ma'avdal b'Rishoina ve'ini ma'avdal b'Shniya. Regarding Havdalah, we're meant to insert the Tefillah of Havdalah Atachan Antanu into our Motzei Shabbos Shemona Esrei. So he does so only regarding the first Shemona Esrei, which is meant for the current obligation, and not into the second Shemona Esrei, which is meant as a Hashlama, as a compensation for the mincha that he missed. The question is, why is this different than before? We just said a minute ago that we follow the current text. One davens twice Shabbos to compensate for the weekday Shemona Esrei. So why regarding Havdalah is this different, that we differentiate between the first Shemona Esrei, which is meant for the current Chiyuv, and that requires Havdalah, and in the second Shemona Esrei, which is the makeup Havdalah, which is the makeup Shemona Esrei, we don't insert Havdalah. Why is this different? Explain the Mefarshim. Havdalah is different. Havdalah is meant as a declaration of separation between Shabbos and the weekday. So once he does it once, what's the point of doing it again? Therefore, only in the first Shemana Esrei he mentions Havdalah and not in the second one. Continues the Brisa. However, if this fellow decided to insert Havdalah in the second Shemana Esrei, not in the first one, the second Shemana Esrei which contained Havdalah, that's valid. But the first one that did not contain Havdalah is invalid. He wasn't Yaitse. Explains Rashi. The first Shemana Esrei doesn't count since it was missing Havdalah. Havdalah is Ma'akev. Regarding the second Shemana Esrei, apparently since he includes Havdalah, he decided to include Havdalah in the second Shemana Esrei. It seems like his intention, his kavanah was that Shemana Esrei should count for the current obligation, for the Ma'ariv obligation. Since the maker of Shemana Esrei doesn't require Havdalah. So apparently his intention was to daven that Shemana Esrei for Ma'ariv. Therefore he's still missing a Hashlama. He hasn't made up his mincha yet. And he requires another tefillah to be a compensation Hashlama for the mincha that he missed. Okay, so Lememra, it appears from here that Havdalah is obligatory to the point that if it's missing, it's invalid. Lememra, apparently, he didn't insert Havdalah into the first Shemana Esrei. It's as if he hasn't davened. He needs to go back. We have a Brisa which teaches us otherwise. Havdalah is not Ma'akev. We learned as follows. Ta, one who errs, he hasn't mentioned a reference to Hashem's strength and power of bringing down rain in the Brach of Tchias HaMesim, which is the second Brach of Shemana Esrei, or he missed She'ela b'Brachos Hashanim, the request for rain in the Brach of Baruch Aleinu. Machzir Noisa, he needs to go back. They are obligatory. If they're missing, Shemana Esrei is invalid. It's not Yaitz. However, regarding Havdalah b'Chinin Hadas, if he missed Havdalah, Ein Machzir Noisa, he doesn't need to go back. It's not Me'akev. Why? Because he can always make Havdalah on the cup of wine. Therefore, if it's missing, it doesn't invalidate the tefillah. So we have a stira from this brisa, which tells us that Havdalah is not Ma'akev, on the previous brisa, which states very clearly that Havdalah is Ma'akev. Says the Gemara Kasha, indeed, it is difficult. We have no resolution. Now it's interesting that, although the Gemara concludes with Kasha, in Halacha, in Shulchan Aruch, it is brought down. The Halacha brings down the first brisa, which states that if one was Mavdil b'Shniya and not Mavdil b'Rishona, he wasn't Yaitse, he needs to daven again. So the Mefarshim asks, if the Gemara concludes with Kasha, why does the Shulchan Aruch bring it to Halacha? So the Mefarshim say that there is a resolution. The Gemara that concludes with the word Kasha doesn't necessarily mean that it's refuted. It means at this point in time the Gemara didn't have a solution. However, there is a teretz to be proposed. Meaning that the reason why in the first brisa, when he was not Mavdal b'Rishona, however he was Mavdal b'Shniya, that the brisa says that the first one that was missing Havdalah was Lo Yosel, it wasn't valid, isn't because it was missing Havdalah. It was because of a different reason. We mentioned earlier that one is meant to daven his Tushman Esreis in a specific order, in a specific sequence. The first one is meant to be for the current obligation. The second one is meant to be Hashlama. Now this fellow who omitted Havdalah in the first Shemana Esrei, apparently he was intending to daven that Shemana Esrei as a Hashlama, as a compensation. Therefore he omitted Havdalah, because the Hashlama doesn't require Havdalah. So since he switched things around, the first one was meant as a compensation, as a Hashlama, therefore it was invalid. He was meant to do the first one as the current obligation, the second one as the Hashlama. He switched things around. He meant the first one to be Hashlama and the second one as the current obligation, therefore he inserted Havdalah only in the second one. Therefore, the first one was Lo Yosel, not because it was missing Havdalah, but because he switched things around. That is the reason why it was Lo Yosel. Therefore, the Shulchan Aruch brings it as halacha l'maisa. True, if one misses Havdalah on an ordinary Matzah Shabbos, it's valid, he was Yaitse. This is a specific case regarding the halacha of Hashlama. Continues the Gemara. Itmar, we learned as follows. Who established, who enacted our tefillas today, our shachars, our mincha and ma'ariv? Where does it come from? We have machlekes. Rabbi Yosef Chanina Amar, tefillas avos tiknam. Our avos, our patriarchs, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, they were the ones who established our tefillas. Rabbi Shimon Levi Amar, no, tefillas connected tmidim tiknam. The Chachamim established them to correspond to the tmidim, to the karbanis, tamid to the karbanis in the Beis Hamikdash. Tani kavas Rabbi Yosef Chanina. We have a brayso in support of the first view, that the tefillas were established by the avos, And as well, we have a brayso of a Tanika by Rabbi Shimon Levi to support Rabbi Shimon Levi's shita that the tefillos were established to correspond to the various karbanis. Tanika by Rabbi Yosef Chanina, we have a brayso in support of Rabbi Yosef Chanina. Avram tikkun tefillah shachris. Avram established tefillah shachris. Shenemar, as it says, Vayashkem Avram ba'boker, he arose in the morning. Ela makom asher amad sham, back to the place that he stood there. Says the Gemara, what does amad mean? Vein amida la tefillah. It's referring to davening. Shenemar vayamod pinchas vayifalel. So we see that the term amida is referring to davening. Avram established the morning tefillah. Yitzchak tikkun tefillas mincha, the afternoon tefillah. Shenemar vayetzi Yitzchak l'shach b'sadeh l'fnei erev. He went out to the field to speak. L'suach, to speak in the sadeh l'fnei erev, towards evening. What does the word sicha mean? Vein sicha el tefillah. It's referring to tefillah. Shenemar tefillah la'ani. A desperate person, ki yadav ifnei Hashem yisbech sicha, he will spill out his speech to Hashem. So we see that sicha is referring to tefillah. That a ani in desperation will pour forth his tefillah to Hashem. So we see that sicha, which is tefillah, was established by Yitzchak. Vayetzi Yitzchak l'soch v'asad l'fnei erev, the tefillah, the sicha of mincha, established by Yitzchak. Yaakov tikkun, he established tefillas arvish nema vayikdav amalkam vayilon sham. He was paigeya in the place. He slept over there. What does vayifka mean? Ve'im pgiya la tefillah. It's referring to tefillah. Shnemar, as it says in the following pasuk, Ba'ato, you, al tispal v'adad hamazeh, don't daven on behalf of this nation. Val tisa ba'adam rina tefillah, don't raise on their behalf rina and tefillah. Al tifka bi, don't be paigeya me, don't daven to me. So we see that the term paigeya is referring to tefillah. Yaakov Avinu established tefillas aris. So we have a brayso in support of the shita of Rabbi Yosef Chanina that the tefillas shachris mincha ma'ariv were established by who? By the Ovis. V'tanik v'asir Shimon Levi. We have another brayso in support of the other view. Says the brayso, ma amru tefillas shachat chatzois. Why does shachris have this specific time frame? You may daven only up until chatzois. Sharei, because tamid shachar, the morning tamid, was offered up until Chatzos, and the Tefillah Shachris was established on account of Tamid Shel Shachar. Therefore, it has the same time frame. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Adar b'shois, only up until 4 hours, because he holds Sharei Tamid Shel Shachar Kar V'Oilach Adar b'shois. He holds that the Tamid Shel Shachar as well was hukrav up until 4 hours, and thus Tefillah Shachris has that same time frame. Continues the brayso. What about mincha? Why did we state that tefillas mincha can be daven until evening? Sharei, it's because tamid shebin arbaim, because the afternoon tamid was offered until evening, and mincha, which corresponds to the afternoon tamid, also contains the same time frame. Rabbi Yehuda ad plaga mincha, until halfway of the period of mincha period, meaning the halfway point of mincha, that is the deadline of the afternoon tefillah of mincha. We'll soon explain what that means. Why? Because in his opinion, Sharei Tamid Sheben Arbayim Kar V'Oilachat Plaga Mincha was only offered until Plaga Mincha, until the point called Plaga Mincha, and therefore tefillah mincha contains the same deadline. Why regarding tefillah erev ma'ariv? We said it has no limit, can daven the entire night. Why? Because what does arvis correspond to? It corresponds to the limbs and the fats of the karbanos that were on the mizbeach the entire night. Sharei Avarim, the limbs, Ubdarim, and the fats, Shleinis Aklum Be'er, which wasn't consumed by the time night came along. Crave Moyachim Kol Laila, stayed on the mizbeach and were burnt the entire night, and therefore arvis, which corresponds to that, also has the same time of the entire night. And finally, why regarding Musaf? May one daven the entire day? Sharei Karban Musaf, Karvaylach Achevet Ad Kolayim. Sharei Karban Shal Musaf and Karav Kolayim. Musaf was brought the entire day, therefore the Tfilas Musaf has the same time frame. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, Acheva Shois is limited until 7 hours, because in his opinion, Sharei Karban Musaf, Karav Vaylach Acheva Shois. Okay, so this brayso corresponds the various tefillos to the various karbanos. Therefore, Shachris, which corresponded to the Tamid Shel Shachar, so according to the Chachamim, up until Chatzos, according to Rabbi Yehuda, up until 4 hours. Mincha, which corresponded to Tamid Shel Bein Arbaim, according to the Chachamim, Ado Erev, according to Rabbi Yehuda, until Plag HaMincha. Arvis, which corresponded to the Ivarim and Padarim that will cover the entire night, you could daven the entire night. Musaf, which corresponded to Karba Musaf, according to the Chachamim, the entire day, according to Rabbi Yehuda, until 7 hours. Now, what does Rabbi Yehuda mean when he says Plag HaMincha? So Rashi explains that Mincha is a time frame in which they will makriv the Tamid Sheben Harbayim. It was meant to be Hukrav Bein Harbayim, in between the two darknesses. Rashi explains this to mean from 6.5 hours into the day, when the evening shadows begin forming. That is one era of one darkness. Between that darkness and the ultimate darkness of evening, Bein Harbayim. So the Korban Tamid Sheben Harbayim was offered somewhere between 6.5 hours and evening. That is Bein Harbayim. On a typical day in the Beis HaMikdash, it was actually offered 9.5 hours into the day. They would shecht it 8.5 hours into the day and only be makriv it at 9.5. They wanted to give the opportunity for the people to bring their various karbanos, and since the karbanos are meant to be brought before the Tamid Sheben Harbayim, the Tamid Sheben Harbayim is meant to be the last karban, therefore they delayed it until 9.5 hours. So the entire time frame from 6.5 hours and on is called Mincha Gedoyla, the greater Mincha. The time frame from 9.5 hours and on, which was a typical time of Hakrava, is called Mincha Ketana. The Rav Yehuda, when he's referring to Plag HaMincha, I only allow up until halfway point through the Mincha, is referring to Mincha Ketana, meaning the time frame from 9.5 until evening, which is a period of 2.5 hours, you can only go up until Plag, half of that time frame, meaning until 10.75 hours. Continues the Gemara. What is referred to as the greater mincha, from 6.5 hours and on. What do we refer to when we say the smaller mincha, the lesser mincha? That is that is from 9.5 hours and on. And when a reader makes reference to Plag HaMincha, is referring to the halfway point of Mincha Ketana, meaning 9.5 hours up until evening is 2.5 hours. Half of that is 1.25 hours. You can only daven Mincha up until 1.25 hours past 9.5, which means up until 10.75 hours. Iboyu, the Gemara is the question. Rav Yehuda, Plag Mincha Kama Kamar, or Plag Mincha Achrein Kamar? When Rav Yehuda says up until Plag HaMincha, half of the Mincha, does he mean up until the first half of the Mincha, or the second half of the Mincha? Meaning, within Mincha Tana itself, we have two halves. We have the first of the Mincha, half of the Mincha Tana, meaning from 9.5 up until 10.75, or is he referring to the second half of the Mincha Tana, meaning the period from 10.75 up until evening? So when Rav Yehuda said you can daven up until Plag HaMincha, does he mean up until 9.5 or up until 10.75? Says the Gemara Toshma, I have a raya from the Brachos. The San Rav Yehuda Omer, Plag HaMincha Achrein Amru. You can daven up until the second half of Mincha. V'hi Yud Aleph Shoyis Chaser V'ya. It is 11 hours minus a quarter, which means up until 10.75 hours. So this is obviously the second half of Mincha. So when he says up until Plag HaMincha, means you can daven up until you pass Mincha Tana, up until the halfway point of Mincha Tana, 10.75 hours. So in conclusion, we have a brisa which clearly correlates the tefillos with the karbanos. This apparently is a refutation to the view of Rabbi Yosef Chanina, who maintains that who established the tefillos? The avos. It wasn't done in correspondence to the karbanos. Says the Gemara, Amalach Rabbi Yosef Chanina, no, la'olam, in reality, Amalach tefillos always tiknum. The avos, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, they established the tefillos. However, the Rabbanan in the latter generations, Ezra and his great assembly of Anshe Adoila, they supported the tefillos with the karbanos. Meaning that although the avos introduced the concept of karbanos, everybody will agree to that. Even the Shita of Rabbi Shimon Levi, the avos were the first one that introduced initially the concept of tefillos. However, regarding the content of the tefillos, the text, certainly that was established by the Anshe Adoila, Ezra and his Bezdin. Regarding the timing as well, that too was established by Ezra and his Bezdin to correspond to the karbanos. Everybody will agree to that. Even Rabbi Yosef Chanina, that the Chachamim were masmich, they supported the the tefillos with the karbanos. If so, what is the difference between the two opinions? The difference is that according to Rabbi Shimon Levi, although the Avos introduced the tefillos, however, since it was Koydem Matan Torah, it was before Matan Torah, it doesn't obligate Klal Yisrael. We don't follow that. We don't obligate ourselves on account of the Avos, but rather on account of the obligation established by the Chachamim, by the Anshe Knesset Agdola. However, according to Rabbi Yosef Hanina, being that the Avos established and introduced the tefillos, that was obligatory upon us as well. So in conclusion, certainly the Avos initially introduced the concept of tefillah. Everybody agreed to that. In addition, everybody agrees that the content, the composition of the tefillos, of the text, were done by the Anshe Knesset Agdola. In addition, the timing, the various time frames according to tefillos, that too was established by the Anshe Knesset Agdola to correspond to the karbanos. The only machlokes is what is the source of the obligation? Why are we mechuyev to daven? According to Rabbi Yosef Hanina, that's because of the Avos. According to Rabbi Shimon Levi, it was not on account of the Avos, but rather on account of the Chachamim in the later generations. But getting back to the Gemara here, where Rabbi Yosef Hanina exceeds, he agrees that indeed the Chachamim supported the tefillos based on the karbanos. And as we explained, at least regarding the timing, the Chachamim corresponded the two things. And he brings a raya. The Gemara brings a raya. If you won't connect tefillah to karbanos at all, tefillah is musaf. The Rabbi Yosef Hanina Mantikna. Who established musaf? We find Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov established Shachos and Mechamayr. What happened to musaf? Ella, you must say tefillah is always tiknam. Indeed, the Avos established the tefillos. But Rabbana nevertheless, in the later generations, they supported the tefillos, the details, the timing of the tefillos based on the karbanos. And since regarding musaf, this wasn't established by the Avos yet. So when they saw that there was no tefillah corresponding to musaf, they established musaf on their own. So once again, the Avos introduced the concept of tefillah to us. The Chachamim, the later generations, expounded on it, elaborated on it. They composed the nusach, the text. They gave us the time frame. They established musaf. The only machlokes is, what is the source of our obligation today? According to Rabbi Yosef Hanina, is because of the Avos. They oblige us as well. According to Rabbi Shimon Levi, it is obligatory upon us because of the Chachamim, the Anshe Knesset Agdola.